welcome to AMCI 2021 March Madness. My name is Ms. Rochelle, and before we start, I would like to go over some very important reminders. There is only one recommended way to view this webinar because we are expecting huge amount of attendees. And just to make sure that we run smoothly, webinar actually recommended that the viewers will view us via a computer. So if you haven't done so yet, you may want to go ahead and do a quick sound check on your panel where you can see the audio. Check on it to see if your sound is good. Make sure that you're selecting computer audio on your panel to be able to hear us properly. And also, it has been advised that it's not recommended to view us on a mobile device. But if you do choose to do so, a good idea is to go ahead and make sure to download the GoToWebinar app. That app is going to be a good one because it's going to be more compatible on your phone, and you should be able to go ahead and still view us and follow along for this presentation. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and invite Miss Tracy in, and she is going to tell you all about the CEUs. Ready, Miss Tracy?
Thank you so much, Miss Rochelle. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Thank you all for attending. And let's go ahead and talk about some important information before we get started. So we're going to talk about the CEUs. So after this webinar, we will share the link to an assessment with you all. So to earn those CEUs, you need to attend this webinar and complete an assessment within an hour or within 24 hours of this webinar. So you will receive an assessment link at the end of this. You will receive an email after this webinar within 1 to 24 hours after the presentation. Okay, and please do not, we ask that you all do not share this link with anyone because this is a violation of AMCI and AAPC copyright clause. And make sure that you're providing your full name and your correct information in the assessment, the full name that you have on file with AAPC and AHEMA. So just make sure that you are entering in that correct information so that way those CEUs can be applied. All right, and if you need CEUs, we have so many CEUs throughout this whole March Madness event. I do want to let you all know that we will have some on-demand events available April 1st. Now you can purchase these this whole all of this for $100 until March 15th. After March 15th, that price will go up significantly. That $100 basically gets you into all of our on-demand events after this March Madness. All these March Madness events are over. And we do offer a CCS course here at AMCI, and we invite you all, if you're interested in studying for your CCS certification, we offer this, and we want to direct you to our website, www.amcicoding.com /courses/CCS course. You can find that link right here on the screen. And we just want to remind you that during our March Madness, we have a total of 30 CEUs to give out. We are very, very excited about this. We're excited to kick off March today with this wonderful presentation by Mrs. J. And we hope that you guys will attend as many events as you can throughout the whole month of March. Now let's get to the good stuff. We're going to meet the A team, and I am actually going to bring in one of our wonderful instructors, Miss Tamika. You all have probably heard her a time or two around AMCI. Miss Tamika, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Miss Tracy. Always a pleasure to join you ladies. And yes, the A team, hey, they are Awesome. That's what I think it stands for as well. So I'm going to introduce the team, and I know you see our wonderful, wonderful princess, but I'm going to save her for last, okay? So we're going to start out with Miss Becca. She makes it happen. She's that voice you hear. We just love Miss Becca. She makes it all just work real well, like a well oiled machine. Who's my next person up there? Who else do we have, ladies? We've got Miss Rochelle, and I see some of you are typing. I love Miss Rochelle. I do too. She is a doll, just a joy, just wonderful to be a part of her class. And I know a lot of you know just how wonderful she is. Who else do we have on that board, Miss Tracy? Oh, Miss Tracy herself. You guys know we can't do it without Miss Tracy. I love Miss Tracy. She always keeps us all cool, calm, and collected. She's always there. Just you don't even have to look. You know she's got your back. She's right there for you. Who else do we have? Miss Michonne. We love Miss Michonne. Always a joy whenever I get an opportunity to be in a class with her. She is wonderful. Just a beautiful spirit, another Southern Belle like myself. Who else we got, Miss Tracy? Hey, that's me. I'm not gonna say too much about my own self, okay? But that is me. Now you got a face with a name. All right, who else we got, lady? Oh, Miss Bennett. I always call her my partner in coding. She and I were interns together. Always such a joy whenever we get a chance to hang out together in class. So who else do we have, Miss Tracy? All right, Miss Crystal. I call Miss Crystal the voice. She is such a joy. She and I are tag team partners with part one when we get all of our wonderful starting coders. And who else do we have? Bringing up the last little slide here, but certainly not least, Miss Mills. So, yeah, she does a tremendous amount with a whole lot of communication things here at AMCI, and we just adore her. And you guys know we also have some interns. I know you're thinking, am I forgetting somebody? But I'm not. Like I said, I got to save her for last, okay? We have some beautiful interns, Miss Andrea, Miss Takima, Miss Tiffany, Miss Carla, Miss Denise, Miss Lakshmi, Miss Sarmi, Miss Patricia, Miss Kamisha, Miss Brenda, Miss Shalini, Miss Stacy, Miss New, Miss Han, Miss Melody, and Miss Tiffany. We could not do it without this beautiful group of interns. They're always willing to jump in, and I see some of them are here in the chat as well. And we just adore you guys. Wonderful to have you guys here as part of the AMCI family. And we welcome all of you guys who are joining us here today for the webinar. I see some of you say you've been waiting for this since last year. We appreciate that because March Madness is a huge deal. It speaks volumes of the generosity of the person I'm about to introduce. Come on, show me all those letters and all those accolades and stuff that comes after Mrs. J's name. It's Tracy. We just adore Mrs. J. I don't know if she realizes how many lives that she touches, how much she does here at AMCI and just throughout the community. This is such a generous thing that she does each year. And I'm so grateful to be a part of the AMCI family, to know all of these beautiful ladies. Come on, Miss J. She is the brain behind it all, ever so humble. I can't say enough about her. So I got to stop it right there, y'all, because I'll start just going on and I might have to pull out a piece of tissue, y'all. She brings me to tears. Such a joy, a beautiful spirit. Mrs. J, y'all. Now, if we can hear the clapping, I know y'all are clapping. Come on now. Let's do it.
OMG. Never had had an introduction so grand. Thank you, Miss Tamika. Thank you, team, and thank you. And I'm going to call you coders. Go ahead, type in the chat. Tell me who you are. If you're a coder, if you're a student, if you're a biller, let me know. Thank you, everyone. All right, Miss Rochelle, if you can push that screen on over, we're going to get started. Thank you. All right. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Tamika, for that wonderful introduction. If you didn't know, I am Mrs. J, and I am the curriculum director here at AMCI, and it is my pleasure to welcome you. It is my pleasure to be your presenter today. Now, let's get started with the goals of the presentation. Goal one, we are going to learn how to identify the principal diagnosis. Goal two, how to identify the first listed diagnosis. Goal three, we are going to provide you with interactive scenarios to test your knowledge. And four, hopefully, we're going to bring you one step closer to first listed and principal code selection mastery. All right, let's begin with our copyright. CCS is a registered trademark of AHIMA. Content found in this presentation is a copyright of AHA, that's American Hospital Association, AHIMA, and AMCI. All right, so this discussion is about principal code selection and first listed code selection. So let's get started and discuss principal code selection. Now, what is the principal diagnosis? Well, the principal diagnosis means when a patient has been admitted and there are multiple diagnoses, and it is the diagnosis that will be sequenced first. So when a patient's been admitted, let's say they have hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and COPD, it is the diagnosis that is sequenced first. It is also the diagnosis that represents the chief reason for the encounter after study for admitted patients. Now, why does the principal diagnosis matter? Why does establishing the principal diagnosis matter? Well, it's important for two reasons. That principal diagnosis often establishes medical necessity. And number two, payers like Medicare, they require medical necessity. In fact, the government requires it. In fact, the Social Security Act of the Social Security Act Section 1862A1A of the Social Security Act says that Medicare will not cover services that are not reasonable and necessary for the diagnosis of treatment or illness or injury. They're not going to pay one red cent if your procedure is not medically necessary. And this language, reasonable and necessary, it's synonymous with medically necessary. So the government says we're not going to pay if it's not medically necessary. Now, what is medical necessity? What is it? Well, medical necessity is when the diagnosis justifies the procedure or treatment. Medical necessity is when a patient has an open fracture. That's the diagnosis, and they have a procedure like open fracture reduction, that is medical necessity. So medical necessity justifies the procedure. Another example is if a patient has chronic pain, like chronic back pain, like my mother. Chronic back pain substantiates medical necessity for a neurostimulator implantation. And the diagnosis of like bradycardia, tachycardia, that substantiates medical necessity for a pacemaker or a defibrillator. So you understand? That's what medical necessity is. Now let's talk about principal diagnosis and medical necessity. Well, I have kind of deduced that they are one in the same. They are, because the principal diagnosis is often that diagnosis that represents the chief reason for the encounter after study for admitted patients. So, as coders, it is our job to analyze the documentation, the doctor's documentation, the chart, and determine what was chiefly treated. So, if we look at our three diagnoses, we have to look at the diagnosis, look at the documentation, and determine which of the three was chiefly treated. And in some, the chief reason for the encounter is that diagnosis that was chiefly treated is often that diagnosis that will substantiate medical necessity for that treatment. Now, not the principal diagnosis just doesn't establish medical necessity. It's just not the chief reason for the encounter. The principal diagnosis has other functions. Hospitals require a principal diagnosis. Payers, like I've said, Medicare also require a principal diagnosis. Why do hospitals require a principal diagnosis? Well, for cost comparison, care analysis, and utilization review. Utilization review is how much of the hospital's resources is being used. In other words, they use that principal diagnosis for research, right? Statistics. Number two, payers use the principal diagnosis. If you are a facility coder, you know that payers use this principal diagnosis for inpatient prospective payment systems, outpatient prospective payment systems, and these are known as reimbursement methodologies. We're not here to talk about that today, but I do want to bring it to your attention. Now, I've given you a little bit of background. It's time to talk about first listed and principal diagnosis. Now, on the left, your first listed diagnosis, this is where you're coding for professionals and outpatient facilities. And your principal diagnosis, you're coding for inpatient facilities. All right? Now I've created this chart, and hopefully this chart will help you. It helps me. We're going to compare and contrast facility and professional coding. All right, so in column one, you see that's for professionals. This is pretty much coding for doctors and qualified healthcare practitioners. In column two, you're coding for outpatient facilities. Facilities are coding for the resources used for that outpatient facility. Inpatient, I'm going to go back a little bit. An inpatient is coding for the resources used for that inpatient facilities. Now, let's look at each line by line. Line one, and let's compare them all. Line one, when we are coding for professionals, we're coding for doctors, qualified healthcare practitioners, durable medical equipment providers. The second column, this outpatient facilities, they're coding for the facilities, the observation unit, the emergency department, outpatient clinics, etc. And three, inpatient facilities are coding for acute care facilities, long-term care facilities, nursing facilities where patients are admitted. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about resources in a moment. Now, number two, professionals report their services using CPT and HCPCS Level 2. Well, let me back up a little bit. The money drivers, how professionals earn their revenue, they earn it from using or reporting CPT and HCPCS Level 2 codes. So do outpatient facilities. They use HCPCS and CPT codes. Now, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something really quickly. I'm going to blank this screen really quickly, and I'm going to remove these red images off the screen, if that's okay, if I can. And the reason is because this presentation was originally pre-recorded, but I decided at the last minute to go live. So that is why we see these little images on the screen. So I do apologize for that. They are gone. Go. All right, so thank you all so much. And I want to thank my team for agreeing to do this with me. All right, so we know the money drivers for professional and outpatient use CPT and HCPCS level 2 codes, inpatient money drivers or ICD-10 CM codes, and PCS codes. These drive the money. Now, the payment methodologies, professionals use the relative value units. Outpatient facilities use APCs. These are ambulatory payment classifications. And inpatients, they use DRGs, diagnosis related groupings. And later in this month, we'll be talking about DRGs. So I invite you to go listen to the presentation. Another thing, professionals code only things confirmed, and so do outpatient facilities. Inpatient facilities, they code for things not confirmed. They code for things like rule out, suspected, likely, probable, you name it, they code it. Okay, not you name it, but they don't code for things that are not confirmed. Excuse me, they do code for things not confirmed. And finally, the main diagnosis for professionals is first listed. It's called first listed. The main diagnosis for outpatient facilities, first listed. And the main diagnosis for inpatient facilities is called principal. All right, so these are the I'm comparing and contrasting all three, but we're going to first talk about inpatient facility or principal coding, establishing that, but we cannot go any further until we distinguish the difference between principal and first listed coding. Okay, on the left, you have your principal code. On the right, you have your first listed diagnosis, excuse me. All right, so when you are coding for the principal diagnosis, it is coding for inpatient facility admissions. First listed, outpatient admissions and professionals. We established that, but it's down here in this section, the language that I want you to pay your, to give your attention. Principal diagnosis is the condition after study that is chiefly responsible for occasioning the patient's admission. Whereas first listed, the definition is the condition that is the primary or chief reason for the outpatient encounter. So if we are to look at this, there's not much difference between the two, not much at a glance. But if I were to say that there is something that is significantly different, I would say let's turn our attention to the principal diagnosis definition and this language after study. This implies that some studying has to be done, some testing, some treatment, some workup, something additional needs to happen to determine that principal diagnosis. Also, the admission. This language admission implies that the patient has to be admitted into the hospital. This patient has to have Well, the doctor has to have written the orders for the patient's admission. So now that I point these two out, to me, principal and first listed diagnosis, they don't look the same so much right now. But if these words, these definitions don't really do it for you, maybe my little friend Michael will. I have a little scenario. See, my friend Michael, he always visits me every year because I tell this story every year. So, pretty much, Michael walks into the ED and Michael is having some chest pain. And pretty much, Michael is going to be treated by the facility and professionals. So, the facility is going to treat Michael and the doctors are going to treat Michael. They're going to do some different things, but one thing that we do know, they have the same goal. And the goal is to diagnose Michael and treat Michael's condition. So, Michael was admitted into the hospital for chest pain. So, you, as the coder, you're going to have to consider a few things. You're going to have to consider the inpatient facility guidelines and professional guidelines. So let's take my little chart, my little compare and contrasting chart, and let's look at what we have to do. In the first column, we're going to code for all the doctors and professionals treating Michael. In the third column, we're going to code for the facility, and we're going to have to consider both of these sets of guidelines. Now, let me give you a visual. Michael is in the hospital. We're going to have to code for the resources used in this hospital. And we're also going to have to code for the professional services. Now, somebody might say, well, what is the resources used in that facility? Well, anything that is owned by that facility is a resource. All right? Anything owned. So I have a question for you, and I'm going to turn my attention to the chat. I have a question. Is the, let's say, the operating room, okay, even though he's not going, let's say he's having a catheterization. Is the usage of that operating room a resource of the facility? Type in the chat, let me know yes or no. Good job. Yes, it is. You all are saying yes, it's a resource. Is the scalpel? Yes. What about the OR nurse? Yes or no? Most of you said yes, and it is anything owned by the hospital. So, no, the nurse is not owned, but the nurse is employed by the hospital. So, anything owned by the facility and anyone employed by the facility is a resource of that facility. Good job, everyone. Now, professionals is anyone providing professional services, and they are not employed by that facility. Now, let's get started and let's get Michael treated. The physician is a professional not employed by that hospital. This physician is going to do the following. The physician is going to conduct a history, exam, and render a medical decision. The hospital, they're going to provide the following resources to treat Michael. They're going to give Michael a semi-private room, probably place Michael on a heart monitor, maybe do a sonogram, MRA, and maybe they'll give Michael a private nurse. These are all resources that the hospital will provide. Now it's time to diagnose Michael. After the physician rendered their, treatment and assessment and plan, they gave Michael the following diagnosis. The physician diagnosed Michael with rule out myocardial infarction. All right. So let's go back to our guidelines here, our guidelines at a glance. Number 4 says that professionals can only code the things that are confirmed. So coders, type in the chat, what is Michael's diagnosis? You all are rocking it, rocking it. If the doctor can code only things confirmed, Michael's diagnosis will be chest pain, right? Rule out is not a confirmatory diagnosis. Remember that. Now, the doctor said Michael has chest pain, but the hospital rendered the following diagnosis. The hospital said, hey, Michael, you have acute myocardial infarction. Remember, hospitals code for things not confirmed. They do code rule outs, possible, likely, etc. Now, why does the hospital code for things not confirmed? Now, this question I'm posing to you, why do you think the hospital does not, the, why do you think the hospital does code for things not confirmed? This is an adult conversation. I like to say grown folks conversation. So it's a little deeper. All right. It's a little deeper than because it's in the guideline. It's deeper than that. The hospital, let me see what you're saying. I'm going to let you answer. Outstanding. I see some phenomenal, phenomenal responses. Outstanding. Some of you get it, and some of you are going to learn, and that is priceless. So the reason the hospital codes for things not confirmed, the hospital has to do something like this. They have to code for the cardiac or chest pain protocol. So when someone comes in with chest pain, there is a protocol. And chest pain will use the same hospital resources as an actual acute myocardial infarction to diagnose that condition. All right. Now, when hospitals, remember I said that they report their services using ICD-10 CM codes? They report their services using the ICD-10 CM codes of a heart attack because that ICD-10 CM code will say that they used or suggests that they used a certain number and type of resources of the hospital's resources to substantiate using that code. Now, if chest pain used the same exact resources as a heart attack diagnosis code, then you should be able to use the same diagnosis code if you're using the same resources. I hope I made that point, and I want to point out that this kind of substantiates why Hospitals codes for things that are not confirmed, because hospitals aren't coding for diagnosis, they're coding for resources, whether that diagnosis was confirmed or not. All right, so I'm moving on, and hopefully that makes sense to somebody. You can talk to me in the chat, let me know. All right, good job. All right, so now let's move on. Just remember that you're going to have to code for two different entities. You're going to code for that professional that codes things that are confirmed. The hospital codes for things not confirmed. But the nature of this story, we need to address the hospital resources, the principal diagnosis. And let's just review that the principal diagnosis is the condition after study. After study means the MRI machine, the MRA machine, the heart monitor, the sonogram that is chiefly responsible for the inpatient admission. And the hospital is coding for the resources chiefly used to treat a condition. Now, where did we get this principal diagnosis language? Where did it come from? Well, it came from the Department of Health and Human Services. In 1974, they said, hey, we need to establish some guidance for inpatient admissions. So they came up with the Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set. And the Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set, and we're going to call it UHDDS, and I'm sure you've seen it a time or two, they established that the condition established after study to be chiefly responsible for occasioning the admission of the patient to the hospital for care. That is the formal definition of principal code selection. Now, where are the principal coding guidelines? Well, they're in your ICD-10 CM manual. Section 2 of your guidelines, where your specific coding guidelines in the front of your manual, after chapter 22, you'll see section 1, 2. That's where you'll find it. And if you have an AMCI medical coding guidelines manual, MCG manual, turn to flip section 2, selection of principal diagnosis. And yes, coders, very quickly, we're going to go over these guidelines on how to select your principal diagnosis. Selection of principal diagnosis. This tells you that you will select your principal diagnosis by choosing or selecting the chief reason for the encounter after study. Now, this language precedes the guidelines. So it's telling you basically this is how you select the principal diagnosis, the chief reason after study. CRAS, we call it CRAS here. Another thing that they advise you, precedence. They say that pretty much all other guidelines take precedence over these Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set guidelines. So guidelines found in the index, guidelines in the tabular list, conventions, and chapter guidelines, they take precedence over the Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set. Now, whenever you can, apply Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set. However, if there's a conflict, use the other guidelines. Guideline A, codes for symptoms, signs, and ill-defined conditions. Pretty much, you do not code symptoms and signs when they're related or integral to a diagnosis. Guideline B, when you have two or more interrelated conditions and each potentially meet the definition for principal diagnosis, this guideline tells you that you have to check the documentation, the guidelines, and the treatment to determine the chief reason for the encounter after study. If you cannot make a determination, any can be principal. Guideline C, when you have two or more diagnoses that equally meet the definition for principal diagnosis. Same exact thing. After you check the guidelines, documentation, and treatment, you will determine the chief reason for the encounter after study. If you can't, any can be principal. Guideline D, when you have two or more comparing or contrasting diagnoses, same thing. After checking the guidelines documentation for treatment, code the chief reason for the encounter after study. If you can't, any can be principal. And that brings us to guideline F. If you have an encounter where the original treatment plan is not carried out, code the chief reason for the encounter after study. Guideline G, when you have complications of surgical and other medical care, your complication will be principal. Guideline H, when you have uncertain diagnosis, we all know this. When your diagnosis is uncertain, it's probable, suspected, likely, questionable, possible, rule out, you code it as current. In fact, you code the condition as it existed or was established. Remember the rule out? Myocardial infarction became myocardial infarction. Guideline I, admission from observation unit. There are two circumstances. If a patient is admitted into the hospital from observation and it was a medical reason, for a medical reason, the medical condition that led to the admission is principal. And number two, if a patient was admitted into observation for a post-operative reason, and then that patient was admitted into the hospital, you're going to code the chief reason for the encounter after study as principal. All right, here are our final two guidelines. J, admission from outpatient surgery. All right, so we've got two circumstances, or three. If the reason for the admission is the complication, and when I'm saying complication, complication of surgery, the complication will be principal. If there's no complication, then the reason for the surgery will be principal. And if the diagnosis is unrelated to a complication or surgery, then you will sequence that unrelated condition as principal. And finally, guideline K, admissions and encounters for rehabilitation. Let's say a patient was admitted into a rehabilitation center. You got three circumstances. The principal diagnosis is the condition being treated by the rehabilitation center. All right, that will be principal. Now, when you can use an aftercare code, you do so if the condition is no longer present, and that can be a principal diagnosis, and so too can a sequela of an injury. So when you have that seventh character S, that too can be principal. It just has to meet the definition of a sequela and aftercare code. All right, so now that we've reviewed all of the guidelines, here are your guidelines in a chart. Yes, this is the AMCI Principal Diagnosis Code Selection Chart. And you might say, is that overkill? Yeah, it might be. It's extra. It might be. At AMCI, we are extra because we go the extra mile for our students to make sure that they know it. So hopefully it's not too much, but let me show you how to use this chart. As you can see, you've got 10 columns. When you have a scenario, you should read your scenario and see if any of these 10 circumstances applies to your scenario. For instance, in column 1, signs and symptoms, if there are signs and symptoms in your documentation, just look below to see what to do. So signs and symptoms, they can be principal when there's no diagnosis present, and they can be coded first if it's in the diagnostic statement and not integral to a codable diagnosis. When your conditions are interrelated, look below to see what to do. When the diagnoses are equal, what do you do? Compare and contrasting diagnoses, you do the same thing. So let's say you confuse 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't matter. They both have the same outcome. So don't worry about it. Guideline 5, when the plan is not carried out, what to do. Complications, when you have complications, whether they're surgical or medical complications, what to do. Uncertain diagnosis, admission from observation, admission from outpatient surgery, and rehabilitation center encounters. This is what to do. Now, coders, we're going to use this chart as we solve scenarios to select the principal code in our scenarios. But before we get to the scenarios, let me show you how to solve a scenario. Let me just tell you the rules. There are 3 steps to solving a principal code scenario or selecting a principal code from a scenario. Number 1, you will inventory. What is inventory? You are going to document all diagnoses, signs, and symptoms. Number 2, you will identify the principal diagnosis, the chief reason for the encounter after study, and this is where you use your chart. And 3, you're going to apply all guidelines. Inventory, identify, apply. All right, I have a scenario, but before I move on to the scenario, I just want to make sure you all are ready. Talk to me in the chat. Let me know if you're ready to go. Good. So the chat is warming up. Mrs. Tracy, are you ready?
Indeed, I am, Mrs. J.
Let's do it.
All right, so here is our first scenario. A patient is admitted due to diarrhea, rectal bleeding, abdominal pain, weakness, and unexplained weight loss. A colonoscopy with biopsy is performed, and it is confirmed to be colon cancer. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to solve. Please place your answers in the chat. Good luck, everyone. Your time begins now.
Wow, wow, wow. You all rock that. I love people putting the answers in the chat. Some of them are putting their inventory, some of them are coding it flat out. Outstanding. All right, let me walk you through this. First things first, I'm going to highlight my key terms, and these are also my inventory. But before I get started, I want to point out this admitted. When you see admitted, it means you're coding for the hospital in this context, okay? So whenever you see the term admitted, we're talking about the hospital, the facility, not the physician. All right. My keywords: diarrhea, rectal bleeding, abdominal pain, weakness, weight loss, colon cancer. Now, it's our job to determine the principal diagnosis, and we're going to use our steps. We're going to inventory all diagnoses, signs, and symptoms. Here they go. And just so you know, I like to inventory in the order presented in the documentation. It just makes it easier. Just makes it easy for me to read. And even though I'm out of sync here, but typically I do. Step two, we have to identify the chief reason for the encounter after study. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this chart. You all should have a handout. Hopefully you do. If you don't, you can probably grab it after this presentation. But here you go. I'm going to stop at column 1. And I'm going to, before I even stop, I'm going to look at all of the other columns to see if anything applies. But almost always, I stop at column 1. Almost always, not always. All right, so I have signs and symptoms, right? So what do I do? All right, so these can be principal when they're not integral. So I got to look over here and see if I have some signs and symptoms. And I have diarrhea, rectal bleeding, weakness, abdominal pain, weight loss. I have 5 signs and symptoms, and I need to know if it's integral to my diagnosis. And the answer is yes. Diarrhea is integral to colon cancer. Rectal bleeding is an indicator of colon cancer. Weakness, abdominal pain, and weight loss are all integral to colon cancer. So therefore, we only have one diagnosis left, and this diagnosis was confirmed, biopsy confirmed by the doctor as colon cancer, and it is the chief reason for the encounter after study. Now, most of you got that right, and you might have said, "Oh my goodness, that was easy. What do we need this lecture for?" Well, I'll tell you one thing. You may have gotten it right. Now you can prove and show how you got it right. Okay, let's continue. It's going to pick up after this. Trust me. All right, Miss Rochelle, take it away. Oh, wait. Before you take it away, Miss Rochelle, if you got that correct, outstanding. But if you learned something, that is priceless. All right, Miss Rochelle, take it away.
Indeed. Thank you, Mrs. J. All right, coders. Now we have another scenario. We have a patient is admitted with fatigue, diarrhea of 2 days duration, diaphoresis, and abdominal pain. The attending diagnosed that the patient is with a viral gastroenteritis and dehydration. The patient was treated with intravenous fluids with electrolyte supplements. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, we'll give you 30 seconds and go ahead. If you know the answer, put that answer in the chat. We want to see it. Good luck.
Good job. The time is up and the answers are coming through. Outstanding. Outstanding. For some of you, you are going to have an aha moment. For some of you, you already knew. Outstanding. My key words: fatigue, diarrhea, diaphoresis, abdominal pain, viral gastroenteritis, and dehydration. These are my key words. So let's do our steps. Step 1, we are going to inventory. Step 2, select the principal diagnosis. Step 3, all guidelines apply. Here is my inventory. I have fatigue, diarrhea, diaphoresis, abdominal pain, viral gastroenteritis, and dehydration. Step 2, I'm reminded I have to choose the chief reason for the encounter after study. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start at column 1. Are there signs and symptoms integral to the diagnosis, to a diagnosis? What are we talking about? We're talking about the signs and symptoms in our inventory list. And we want to know, are these signs and symptoms integral or related to any of the diagnoses in this inventory list? And you see, we have 2 diagnoses in this inventory list. We have the signs and symptoms that I've just read. We have viral gastroenteritis, that's a diagnosis, and dehydration. And coders, all of these signs and symptoms are integral to these diagnoses, at least one or the other. Fatigue is integral. Diarrhea, diaphoresis, that's profuse sweating. Abdominal pain, yes, they are related. Now I have 2 diagnoses. What do I do? Well, I'm going to go to my chart because these 2 diagnoses. Well, what am I going to do first? I think I'm going to go to my documentation and I'm just going to look and see what the doctor says. The doctor basically said that the patient has viral gastroenteritis and dehydration. So both of these diagnoses seem equal to me. They seem equal. So what do I do? Well, if I look below, it says either maybe principal. Well, what do? I have to look at this documentation. I have to look at the treatment, look at the workup, and I have to determine which was chiefly treated or chiefly worked up. Now, since I said that, coders, of these 2, which one was chiefly treated or chiefly worked up? Or were they both treated equally? And I'm looking at the chat, and some of you get it. You all get it. Outstanding. All right. So, how do I know which one is chiefly treated? I go back to the documentation. I look and see what was done. Intravenous fluids. Okay. Intravenous fluids can treat both viral gastroenteritis and dehydration. So, what else was done? With electrolyte supplements. All right. So, if we had intravenous fluids with electrolyte supplements treat electrolyte imbalances. An electrolyte imbalance is a symptom of dehydration. So I will have to deduce that dehydration was chiefly treated and thus the chief reason for the encounter after study. How do you feel, coders? Do you all understand that? Outstanding. Outstanding. You all are rocking it. Some of you got it correct. Outstanding. But you know what? A lot of you had an aha moment, and that is priceless. All right. Good job. I think we're ready for our next scenario. Mrs. T, take it away.
All right, everybody's doing such a wonderful job. Keep it up, coders. So here's our next scenario. All right, a patient is admitted with chest pain, shortness of breath, and a heart murmur. The patient undergoes a diagnostic cardiac catheterization, which shows two vessel coronary artery disease, native coronary arteries, and severe mitral valve stenosis. It is recommended that the bypass surgery with mitral valve replacement be performed as soon as possible. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, everyone, 30 minutes on the clock. Your time begins now. Good luck. I think I may have said 30 minutes, but I meant 30 seconds. Your time begins now.
And your time is up. I'm going to give you a little more time. Go ahead, put your answers in the chat. Thank you so much, Mrs. T. And you all are rocking that chat. Okay, so good. Let those answers and keywords come on through. And for those of you who are ready, here are my keywords: chest pain, shortness of breath, heart murmur, two vessel coronary artery disease, and severe mitral valve stenosis. All right, coders, let's go ahead and solve this one. At the bottom, oh, we're a little out of sync here. Okay, so at the bottom are the signs and symptoms. Our task is to determine the chief reason for the encounter after study. So we're going to stop at number one, our signs and symptoms. All right, let's look at our inventory. We have the following signs and or symptoms: chest pain, shortness of breath, heart murmur. And we have two diagnoses in this inventory list: two vessel coronary artery disease and severe mitral stenosis. All right, coders, are the signs and symptoms integral to the diagnoses in this inventory list? Yes, yes, you all are saying it. They are. Chest pain will be eliminated, shortness of breath eliminated, and heart murmur eliminated. Now I've got two diagnoses. What do I do? In fact, both of these diagnoses appear equal. So we know we have to look at the treatment and the workup to determine which is principal. So what did they do? A diagnostic cardiac catheterization. That diagnostic cardiac cath uncovered two vessel coronary artery disease and severe mitral valve stenosis. So we had one treatment that uncovered two diagnoses. And what is the doctor going to do about it? The doctor recommended that bypass surgery with mitral valve replacement be done as soon as possible. So when we look at these diagnoses, we can unequivocally say that they are equal, and the treatment and or workup for both of these diagnoses were equal, so anyone can be principal. How are you doing, coders? Do you all understand that? Yes, both. Anyone can be principal. Remember, only one diagnosis or diagnosis can be principal. So anyone, because this workup uncovered both. So one was not more chiefly treated or worked up than the other, according to this documentation. All right, so it's up to you. All right, we're ready to roll. We have another scenario. Ms. Rochelle. Oh, by the way, if you got that correct, outstanding. If you learned something, that is priceless. All right, Ms. Rochelle, take it away.
Alrighty. Okay, coders. The next one, we have a patient is admitted to the hospital with chest pain, nausea, and dyspnea. The patient has a history of prior myocardial infarction 2 years earlier. The pain is atypical. An ECG and cardiac enzyme study or creatinine phosphokinase are ordered, as well as upper gastrointestinal series to rule out esophageal reflux. The admitting diagnosis by the attending physician is unstable angina or esophageal reflux. What is the principal diagnosis? Coders, you have 30 seconds. If you know the answer, please share those in the chat. Good luck.
All right, I see a lot coming through. Great job. Yes. Okay, my keywords: chest pain, nausea, dyspnea, prior myocardial infarction, atypical chest pain, rule out esophageal reflux, and unstable angina. All right. All right, coders. Let's go ahead and solve. All right, so at the bottom, our inventory: chest pain, nausea, dyspnea, old myocardial infarction, atypical chest pain, unstable angina, and esophageal reflux. Often you'll see my signs and symptoms at the top, and at the bottom, my diagnoses. We have two: unstable angina, and esophageal reflux, or GERD. Okay, so let's go ahead and eliminate any signs and symptoms that are integral to either of these two diagnoses. So chest pain, that's integral to angina and esophageal reflux. Nausea, that is integral to both. Dyspnea, both. It just depends on the person. History of myocardial infarction, that is not integral, so we're going to leave it. And what about atypical chest pain? Absolutely. What is this? We got two. Okay. All right. So unstable angina, esophageal reflux. These are our diagnoses. And the doctor said, hey, this is unstable angina or esophageal reflux. So, coders, which guideline did you reference? Which guideline on this chart? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Okay. You are rocking it. Go ahead. Tell me, which guideline did you reference? Yes, and remember, it's not so bad. The guideline is or, compare and contrast. So if you see either or and or either or, this is comparing and contrasting. So the doctor really didn't say which one it was. The doctor said you have both. It's either or. So they're contrasting. Therefore, coders, we have to look at the treatment and the workup to determine which will be principal. So we have to go back into this documentation. Which one did they treat more? Unstable angina or GERD? Which one was chiefly treated? So let's go back. We know an ECG and cardiac enzyme study took place, and that treated the angina, and an upper gastrointestinal series to rule out esophageal reflux. So I can't tell. I can't tell. Now, some of you might say, well, the ECG and the cardiac enzymes was more chiefly treated. I would disagree. If you have ever had an upper gastrointestinal series, that's a lot, way more equipment. But guess what? We're not clinicians here. So you know what, coders? Either or. All right? So either may be principal. That is my final answer, and I'm sticking to it. And if you got that correct, outstanding. All right, time to move on. We have another scenario. Let's keep practicing. All right, Mrs. T, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mrs. J. All right, coders, here's our next scenario. A patient was placed on observation status after bladder sling surgery due to a prolapsed bladder. It was discovered that the patient was unable to walk after the procedure. X-rays were taken, and it was determined that he suffered a hip fracture during the procedure. The patient was admitted into the hospital for treatment. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, you know the drill. 30 seconds on the clock. Your time begins now. Good luck, everyone.
All right, time's up. You guys are rocking it. Look at that person in the chat saying latrogenic hip fracture. You better believe it is. All right, so some people may not really understand this exercise, so I just want to reiterate. We are selecting the principal diagnosis. That is the one that is sequenced first, okay? So it's the diagnosis sequence first. So we will code the others. If it's not crossed out, it gets coded. All right, good job. Here are my keywords. Prolapsed bladder, unable to walk, hip fracture. Those are my keywords, and these are my inventory as well. And that's my step one. Step two, we have to identify the chief reason for the encounter after study. I'm going to start at the signs and symptoms. If there are any signs and symptoms that are integral to any of these diseases here, we're going to get rid of it. Any signs and symptoms? Inability to walk, gotta go. That leaves us with bladder prolapse and hip fracture. Okay, so which one do we code? I don't know. Which one do we code? So coders, which guideline on this chart will you need to reference? Some say saying 6. Most of you are saying 6. Oh, I see some 8s. I see 2. I see 4. I see lots. Good job. It's 8. Why is it 8? Because the patient was admitted from observation, right? Patient was placed on observation status. Then they were admitted because of the hip, right? So we're going to use guideline 8. This, hey, it's more specific. If you used 6, you might just have gotten the same answer too. I know you would. All right, so the x-rays determined that the patient suffered a hip fracture during the procedure. Now let's reference why we are going to, how we're going to select the principal diagnosis. So for post-op, and this is post-op, you're going to code the reason for the encounter after study. That is our circumstance. So the reason for the encounter is the patient suffered a hip fracture. That it says the patient was admitted into the hospital for treatment. So the reason for that encounter after study is the hip fracture. It is not the prolapsed bladder. The patient would have gone home, I guess, for the prolapsed bladder. So fractured hip, laterogenic fractured hip, or am I saying it laterogenic hip? And if you got that correct, outstanding. How are you doing? How are you doing? And 6 is a complication of surgery, but we had something specific, so we used it. You all are doing outstanding. Talk to me in the chat. Let me know how you are. I think I'm not sure who's coming up next. Is that you, Mrs. Rochelle? Miss Rochelle?
Sure, I can do it, Mrs. J. I'd love to do it. Let's do it because these coders are amazing. I know they want more. So,
Aren't they amazing? Outstanding. All right, coders, you are rocking. Keep it going.
yes, ma'am. Alrighty, if you could just forward it for me, beep beep, Mrs. J, please. Alrighty, thank you so much. Okay, coders, here's for you another scenario. We have a 63-year-old male is admitted with chest pain. Cardiac enzyme levels are elevated, and the ECG could not confirm an acute myocardial infarction. The patient was diagnosed with rule out acute myocardial infarction. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, coders, as usual, put your answers in the chat, and you all are doing amazing. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Rochelle. Way to rock it, coders. I'm going to pick up the pace now so we can get finished on time. All right, so my keywords: chest pain, enzyme levels elevated, rule out acute myocardial infarction. What is the principal diagnosis? Let's inventory. We have chest pain, elevated cardiac enzyme levels, rule out myocardial infarction. If we stop at column 1, these are our signs and symptoms, and we have to determine the chief reason for the encounter after study. So we know we need to use column 1, and we have to eliminate signs and symptoms in our inventory list. We have 2 signs and symptoms: chest pain and elevated cardiac enzyme levels. And then, which guideline coders on this chart do we need to follow? That's right. You all are saying it. We need to follow guideline 7. It says when you have uncertain diagnosis, you must code the condition as if it existed or was established. So, our diagnosis, acute myocardial infarction. All right, so this is Michael's scenario. All right, so if you got that correct, outstanding. Mrs. T, are you ready for me?
I'm ready, Mrs. J. Let's do this. All right, here's our next scenario. Patient is admitted after an outpatient percutaneous needle biopsy of the right kidney for nephritis. The patient developed an arrhythmia while in the recovery room, and the decision was made to admit the patient to ICU. The patient received telemetry monitoring while in ICU. Ultimately, the arrhythmia resolved. The biopsy revealed lupus nephritis. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, coders, you got this. 30 seconds begins now.
All right, I see those answers coming through, and some of you are rocking it. You all are getting it. Outstanding. And others, they are learning something. I know you're going to have an aha moment now. All right, what are my keywords? Nephritis, arrhythmia, lupus nephritis. What is the principal diagnosis? Okay, so the patient was admitted. So we're going to use principal diagnosis and our inventory, nephritis, arrhythmia, and lupus nephritis. Our goal, let's determine the chief reason for the encounter after study. I was kind of stalling a little bit because I wanted you all to get your answers in. Now I'm ready to solve. I'm going to use this chart. Number 1, are there any signs and symptoms in this inventory list that's integral to any diagnoses in this inventory list? Go ahead, type your answer in the chat. I got one response. I got one response. Okay, let me tell you, nephritis is a symptom of lupus nephritis. Yes, it is. Okay, well, lupus nephritis is definitely a more specific type of nephritis. So you don't have to code both. And we are going to eliminate nephritis. All right, and that leaves us with arrhythmia and lupus nephritis. So, what do we do with these two diagnoses? Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look at my documentation. I want to see what's going on. It says number 9, that this patient was admitted from outpatient surgery. Is that what took place? Well, let's look at our documentation. Admitted after outpatient percutaneous needle biopsy. Absolutely. And this patient was even in the recovery room. This patient was in surgery. So we're going to use guideline 9. And it says that when a patient is admitted from outpatient surgery, if another condition unrelated to the surgery, then the unrelated condition is principal. Coders, when we're talking about related to the surgery, this is either caused by the surgery, directly caused by the surgery, like bleeding, like our circumstance, we had a lateral fracture that in the documentation said it was caused by the surgery, and pretty much your physician has to state that it was caused by the surgery. So if this arrhythmia was caused by the surgery, the documentation needs to say it. It does not, right? So this patient was admitted for a condition that is not related to the surgery. Therefore, that is going to be our principal diagnosis. Arrhythmia. How do you feel? If you got that correct, outstanding. I saw you coming through in that chat. If you learned something and I see the oh wows and the ahas coming through, priceless. And don't you forget it. All right. I think this is you, Miss Rochelle. Take it away.
Alrighty. So next one, we have a patient was admitted into a rehabilitation facility after developing a non-dominant left-sided hemiparesis after a recent stroke. What is the principal diagnosis, coders? Put your answers in the chat. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Miss Rochelle. And you guys are rocking it. Outstanding. Okay, keep those answers coming. And I'm going to show you my keywords. Non-dominant left-sided hemiparesis, stroke. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, we will inventory. We have two circumstances here. We have non-dominant hemiparesis and personal history of a stroke. Which guideline? We're not going to stop at one, right? No, there are no signs and symptoms here. We're going to stop at 10. Yes, guideline 10. This patient was admitted into a rehabilitation facility. So when you have a rehabilitation facility, go ahead and look at the rehabilitation guideline at 10. And it says the principal diagnosis is the condition for which the services is being performed. So this patient's going into the rehabilitation center to receive treatment for that non-dominant left-sided hemiparesis, right? Yes, they're not going into a rehabilitation center for a stroke, right? Because strokes are acute. That means it's happening right now. The doctors often resolve the stroke in the ED or the OR. It's resolved there. They generally don't go further than that. All right? Okay, so we know stroke is pretty intense, but strokes don't typically last longer than that ED or that OR. Okay, so the answer, your non-dominant hemiparesis. All right, coders, we have one more. I'm going to ask Mrs. T to come on to the fore. But before I do that, if you got that correct, outstanding. And if you learned something, coders, that is priceless.
Yes, and we are indeed having a lot of outstanding and priceless moments. All right, coders, here's our final scenario. A patient was admitted to the hospital for lethargy. The patient has a history of hypertension, diabetes, and COPD. During the admission, the patient's blood pressure and sugar levels were elevated and managed by daily dosages of lisinopril and insulin. The patient COPD required that the patient be placed on oxygen for the entire hospital stay. What is the principal diagnosis? All right, 30 seconds on the clock. Your time begins now. Good luck, everyone.
Okay, I see a lot of people have different answers. This is interesting. So it's going to be aha moments for everyone. Look at that patient there. Isn't that patient just as happy as he can be? All right, here are my keywords: lethargy, hypertension, diabetes, COPD. That's it. I guess I moved too fast. Here's my inventory list here: lethargy, hypertension, diabetes, COPD. Our job? We have to select the chief reason for the encounter after study. All right, I'm going to start at number one: signs and symptoms. Are there any signs and symptoms integral to any of the diagnoses? We have lethargy, that's our sign and symptom. We have hypertension, diabetes, COPD. Absolutely. Hypertension, diabetes, COPD are our diagnoses, and you guys are rocking it saying lethargy is integral. It's related to possibly all three. Now, coders, we have a dilemma. We got a dilemma because I think all three of these are equal, right? I think all three of these are equal. So what do I have to do? I have to look at the treatment and work up and determine which diagnosis was chiefly treated. I'm going to give you a moment to do that. Of these three, which diagnosis was chiefly treated? Yes, 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 yes. You guys are rocking it. Outstanding. All right, so let's go back and see. Well, we know that the patient's blood pressure, that they just took the patient's blood pressure and they prescribed this patient lisinopril for that blood pressure. The patient's sugar levels, so that could have been urine or blood test, was taken, and then the patient was given insulin, daily dosages of lisinopril and insulin. But for the COPD, that patient was placed on oxygen for the entire hospital stay. Coders, what do you think was chiefly treated? And that's right. COPD was the chief reason for that encounter after study. Outstanding. That is the way I love to end things. But we're not done. We are not done. And somebody said, hey, it's a bummer. I didn't get that. But you know what? You got it now. All right. Okay, so it's time to learn about the first listed code selection. Yes. Let's go back to our comparing and contrasting chart. Remember the first two columns, professional coders and outpatient facility coders? Their goal is to identify the first listed diagnosis. And where do we find these guidelines for first listed code selection? We find it in the ICD-10-TM coding manual, section 4 of the guidelines, section 4 guidelines. So right after your guidelines, your specific coding guidelines, chapter 22, keep going to your section guidelines until you reach section 4. And if you are following along in your AMCI MCG manual, go ahead and turn to the flip section 2, selection of first listed diagnosis, and we're going to quickly review them. All right, so these guidelines are for diagnostic coding and reporting outpatient services. So we're reporting outpatient services and provider-based office visits. So you use these guidelines for outpatient services and provider-based office visits, and do not use these guidelines for inpatient facility coding. Now, your first listed code definition is the chief reason for the encounter. And specific coding guidelines, as well as your index, guidelines in the index and guidelines in the tabular list, they will have precedence over these section 4 guidelines. And they say this twice, so I'm going to say it twice. When you have uncertain diagnoses, do not code them. Guideline A, selection of your first listed condition. Basically, this is how you do it. You look up your code always in the alphabetic index. You do that first, then verify in the tabular list. Next, when you have outpatient surgery, you code the chief reason for the surgery as first listed. When you have observation stays, there can be 2 reasons. If the observation stay is for a medical condition, the medical condition is first listed. If the observation stay is for a complication, then the reason for the surgery is first listed. Moving on to guideline B. Guideline B says that you have to use the complete code set. Guideline C says that you have to code accurately. You have to look at the doctor's documentation and code accordingly. Guideline D, signs and symptoms. It tells you how to regard signs and symptoms. Pretty much we know that signs and symptoms can be coded when they are not integral to a diagnosis. Guideline F, level of detail in coding. This guideline says code the full extent of the code characters as required. Code to the highest level of specificity. Here you go. Now let's move on to guideline G. Guideline G says, when you are coding for the diagnosis, condition, problem, or other reason for the encounter, you're going to sequence the chief reason for the encounter first. When you have uncertain diagnoses, they repeated it. Here's the guideline H. This is where uncertain diagnosis lives. Guideline H, you do not code uncertain diagnosis. Guideline I, when you have chronic diseases, you can report these chronic diseases as many times as the patient receives treatment for them. But this guideline J, code all documented conditions that coexist. All right, so you code any condition that coexists with your diagnosis, with your first listed diagnosis, code all documented conditions. In fact, these guidelines are not only teaching you how to code for the first listed diagnosis, they're teaching you how to code for all other codable diagnoses. So make sure you code all documented conditions that coexist at the time of the visit, and you do not code resolved conditions. And if the condition is resolved and it's pertinent to the encounter, you can code it, but use history codes, personal history codes. Now let's move on to guideline K. Patients receiving diagnostic services only. You're going to sequence the chief reason for the encounter, code all coexisting conditions at the time of that encounter. Now, when a patient is receiving routine laboratory and radiological testing services and there are no signs and symptoms or a diagnosis, you have to use Z01.89 for routine lab radiology testing when there's no diagnosis, signs, and symptoms. However, in that encounter, let's say something was found, the doctor diagnosed the patient. If a diagnosis was achieved by that test, then you code the diagnosis or you code the sign and symptom first. Guideline L, patients receiving therapeutic services only. Guideline L, code the chief reason for the encounter as first listed, and the only exception is chemo and radiation therapy. Guideline M, patients receiving pre-operative evaluations. This is pre-operative testing, pre-operative exam. You're going to sequence Z01.81 first from that category, then next, the reason for the surgery. And here's our final set of guidelines. Ambulatory surgery, guideline N. In the setting of preoperative and postoperative if diagnoses, if you have ambulatory surgery and you know when they put a preoperative diagnosis and a postoperative diagnosis, this is the guideline that says your postoperative diagnosis is your first listed. So if you ever wondered where that came from, here you go. And also when you have routine outpatient prenatal visits, this is guideline O. It tells you to go to chapter 15 for the guidance. Guideline P, encounters for general medical examinations with abnormal findings. All right, so this guideline says when a patient has a routine physical, the reason for the encounter is that routine physical, and the doctor happens to find something during that encounter, that routine physical will still be sequenced first, and you'll need to use codes Z00.00 and Z00.12. Sequence those first, followed by what the doctor found. If it's HTN, that goes second. And finally, guideline Q, encounters for routine health screenings. It just directs you to go to chapter 21 of your ICD-10 CM guidelines. That's a lot of guidelines, right, coders? But look what we did. At AMCI, we created a first listed code selection chart. And if you have the MCG manual, it is in there for you. And if you have the handout, we gave it to you. All right, here it is. We have 10 columns, just like we did for the principal listed code chart. Your signs and symptoms is in 1, outpatient surgery, observation stay, chronic diseases, coexisting conditions, diagnostic procedures, therapeutic services, preoperative evaluations, ambulatory surgery, and general and medical exams with abnormal findings. All right, coders. We're going to use this chart, but now we're going to get started and we're going to solve a few scenarios. All right, so in order to solve the first listed diagnosis, you follow the same exact steps. You're going to inventory first, inventory all possible diagnoses, signs, and symptoms. Number two, you're going to identify your first listed diagnosis. And three, apply all guidelines. All right, Ms. Rochelle, are you ready for the first scenario?
Oh,
Let-
absolutely, Mrs. J. I'm so ready, and I think the coders are waiting for it too. So let's do it. Thank you. All right, now coders, for this one, you're going to look up the first listed, as Mrs. J said. Here's your scenario. A patient arrives to the physician's office for complaints of a severe abdominal pain. She has a history of hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and gastroesophageal reflux disease. The patient was sent for abdominal ultrasound, and it was determined that the patient has a ruptured appendix. Identify the first listed and all other codable diagnoses. All right, if you can just give us the first listed coders, that would be great. We'll give you 30 seconds, and your time begins right now. Good luck.
You all are rocking it. Keep them coming, keep them coming. And as you keep them coming, I'm going to show you my keywords. We have abdominal pain, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and GERD, and ruptured appendix. Thank you again, Ms. Rochelle. My inventory: severe abdominal pain, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, GERD, and ruptured appendix. What do I do? Well, my goal is to find the chief reason for the encounter. And I'm going to stop at column 1. And it says, do not code signs and symptoms when integral to a codable diagnosis. So that's right. I see you all saying that the sign and symptom that is integral is abdominal pain. It is definitely related to GERD. So that leaves me with hypertension, diabetes mellitus, GERD, and ruptured appendix. And it's saying that all other diagnoses are codable. Hey, coders, how do we know they're codable? Which of these 1 through 10, which one says that all of these diagnoses are codable? Which one? Good job. Good job. If you said 5, outstanding. If you said 4, that's good too. Okay, so we can code all documented conditions that coexist at the time of the encounter. All of these are documented, they coexist at the time of the encounter. Now, our job is to determine which of these 4 represents the chief reason for the encounter after study. The chief reason for the encounter after study? Well, not after study, excuse me, not after study. The one that was chiefly treated, okay? Well, we had the patient came in with abdominal pain, right? The patient had an abdominal ultrasound, and the patient was diagnosed with ruptured appendix. Of the 4, the abdominal ultrasound was chiefly treated, thus is the chief reason for the encounter. It was chiefly treated or chiefly worked up. And I think you all got that. Outstanding. And if you learned something that is priceless, okay, We got another scenario. All right, so before I'm going to ask Mrs. Tracy to come on and read the scenario, but before we read the scenario, I want to tell you this is a true story that Mrs. Tracy, well, I'm about to tell you a true story, and Mrs. Tracy's going to tell you about something else. But this man right here in the stands is intercepting a ball. In October 14th, 2003, this gentleman, Steve Barton, he intercepted this ball. This was a National League championship game, and Steve Barton caught the ball instead of the player. And what team is there? The Cubs, the Chicago Cubs at Wrigley Field. And the Cubs lost the game after this gentleman caught the ball. All right, Mrs. Tracy, take it away. Tell them about Steve.
It's a very interesting story. Thank you so much, Mrs. J. All right, here is our scenario. A 47-year-old patient arrives to the ED after an incident at Wrigley Field. The patient attempted to catch a fly ball, interrupting a potential out for the home team. The fans became angered and began throwing things at him. The patient received multiple intermediate lacerations on his arms. The patient has a history of hypertension, high cholesterol, personal history of prostate cancer, and status post prostatectomy 4 years ago. Coders, please identify the first listed diagnosis and all other codable diagnoses. All right, you have 30 seconds. Your time begins now. Good luck, everyone.
All right, I'm giving you more time, and some of you can, I don't know how you're able to do this, but they have written every single diagnosis in record time. How are you able to do that? Please tell me, type in the chat. And I see my name just flying through this chat, and I promise you that is not me, but I will say I do have a name twin, first and last name. Hi, twin. All righty, let's do it. Okay, so here are my keywords: multiple intermediate lacerations, hypertension, high cholesterol, personal history of prostate cancer, and status post prostatectomy 4 years ago. All right, my inventory. We have multiple intermediate arm lacerations, hypertension, high cholesterol, personal history of prostate cancer, and status post prostatectomy. Our goal? Chief reason for the encounter. We have to determine it. Now, coders, what do I do first? Well, we're going to go to signs and symptoms, right? No, there are no signs and symptoms. So, what do I have to do? I'm going to go down here. Do I have any diagnoses here? Well, we do have multiple intermediate lacerations on his arms, and then we have these HTN, high cholesterol, and prostate cancer. So it's evident that the reason Steve walked into the ED was those multiple lacerations on the arms. We know that. That's the only thing that's the reason why he came. It doesn't really indicate that they did anything, but that is the reason that Steve walked through the door. So therefore, it is the reason for the encounter. All of the other conditions are incidental. He just happens to have hypertension, happens to have high cholesterol, happens to have a personal history of prostate cancer. But coders, do we code them all? Do we code them all? Well, we know that we code coexisting conditions, but we do not code resolved conditions. Coders, is anything resolved in this inventory list? Anything resolved? Absolutely. We can deduce that the prostate cancer is resolved because he has a personal history of it. That means it's in the past, and he had a prostatectomy. The prostatectomy likely eradicated this condition. Likely. Now, if you're coding HCC, they're going to say, oh, you can't do that. The doctor has to say the patient doesn't have, you know what? We're saying it today. Steve doesn't have prostate cancer. He has a history of it. We're not going to code it. And the reason why we're not even coding this, we could use the personal history code. The reason why we're not using the personal history codes is because it's not pertinent to the encounter. This patient came in for those multiple intermediate arm lacerations. The fact that he has a personal history of prostate cancer that's been eradicated is not pertinent. So, therefore, we are eliminating the two. All right, so we did go over our time, but I am still going to continue. I have one more scenario, first listed scenario, then I have a challenge. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask my team if you have to leave, you are excused. You will get your link within 1 hour to 24 hours to take your test. Or you know what? If you all can place the link in the chat, go right ahead, place the link in the chat for those that have to leave. This link is the link for your CEUs. So go ahead, take your link, take your exam. You get 2 tries, but you'll get your certificate at the end automatically. I want to thank you. And if you want to excuse yourself, you can. I have one more first listed scenario and I have one challenge. So if you want to stay for the challenge, go right ahead. And I just, again, want to thank you. All right. Thank you for coming. All right, we're going to keep going. And all other diagnoses are codable. And for those of you that got this correct, outstanding. All right, I don't even know whose turn it is. Surprise me.
It's gonna be me.
Thank you.
Alrighty. And thank you, Mrs. J. Great explanations and great scenarios. So, coders, here's another one. In the emergency department, an 87-year-old woman with type 2 diabetes underwent amputation of her fourth digit of the right foot approximately 5 weeks ago. At that time, insulin therapy was discontinued and she is currently following a 1400 calorie per day diet. The patient was sent home and was since developed an increasing amount of pain and cellulitis of her right foot. The patient is a poor historian. She is alert, but her orientation seems to be off. Information is obtained from her old records and from the transfer sheet from the nursing home, February 2004, pacemaker implantation secondary to sick sinus syndrome or SSS with congestive heart failure stable with Lasix 40 milligrams by mouth and bradyarrhythmia as well as pleural effusion. In October of 2006, the patient suffered an acute myocardial infarction. Identify the first listed diagnosis and all other codable diagnoses. So you have 30 seconds, coders. Good luck on this one.
I think they need more time than that. We're going to give you a little more. Okay. All right, you all are rocking it. Those diagnoses, those keywords are coming through. My keywords: type 2 diabetes, status post amputation of fourth digit of the right foot, pain and cellulitis, pacemaker implantation, secondary to sick sinus syndrome, congestive heart failure, bradyarrhythmia, pleural effusion, and old AMI. Our job, we have to identify the first listed diagnosis as well as all other codable diagnoses. All right, let's go ahead and do our due diligence, and we're going to go and evaluate these steps. Step one, inventory. We have diabetes. Status post amputation, right toe, right foot pain, cellulitis, right foot, seems disoriented, status post pacemaker, congestive heart failure, bradyarrhythmia, pleural effusion, sick sinus syndrome, and old MI. Okay, coders, what did you see that I added in here? Anybody see anything? Yes, someone got it. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to show you in a minute. All right, so what do? We have to code the chief reason for the encounter. Now, pretty much the chief reason: this patient developed an increasing amount of pain and cellulitis of her right foot. So, pretty much the patient had an amputation 5 weeks ago, and she developed pain and cellulitis, right? So that is our chief reason for the encounter. We don't really even have to evaluate as much for first listed. You have to really figure out what is the chief reason for the encounter. And this is what you can also do. You can also say, well, did she come in the door for diabetes? No. For that amputation? No, she already had the amputation. The foot pain? No, 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 no. None of this stuff. Only the cellulitis. I just accelerated it. All right, so let's go ahead let's go ahead and consider any sign or symptom that's here. So let me click on the diagnosis, sign, and symptom, and you let me know if it stays. Are we going to keep diagnosis? Yes, everyone said yes. And the reason? Number 5, it coexists at the time of the encounter. Are we going to keep number 2, status post amputation right toe? And it is raining in that chat. Now, the only way we'll keep it if it's pertinent to the encounter. Is it pertinent to the encounter? Yes, it is pertinent, right? Yeah, we got to keep that. What about right foot pain? Are we going to keep this? That's right. It is raining nose. Absolutely. We're not going to keep this right foot pain. It is a symptom of that cellulitis. What about seems disoriented? Seems disoriented. Absolutely not. It's going to go. Why is it going to go? Okay, I think I got a little ahead of myself. So we'll get back to that. I'll tell you why. All right, so we're going to code the status post pacemaker. Yeah, you guys are like, yes, no, yes, no. You know what? That's the heart. You probably should. Right? That's your vital organ. It is always going to be pertinent to your encounter because there's certain exams that the patient can have with that or cannot have with that pacemaker. Let's say they can't go in an MRI with that pacemaker. Yeah, so you always are going to have to, whenever it's pertinent to the encounter, you will code it. So yeah, this is a coding judgment. Congestive heart failure. Yes, we're keeping that pacemaker. Yes, we are going to code the congestive heart failure. Bradyarrhythmia, we are not, because it is integral, right, to the congestive heart failure. What about pleural effusion? No, bradyarrhythmia is not integral to congestive heart failure. It's integral to SSS. What about pleural effusion? Are we going to code that? No, you're right. No, it's integral to congestive heart failure. Okay? That's water on the lungs. It is integral to CHF. Sick sinus syndrome. Yes, we will code it. Sick sinus syndrome is a disease. It's the heart's natural pacemaker. And when that's out of whack, you need a pacemaker. So this bradyarrhythmia, this is a symptom of a pacing problem. So we're not coding bradyarrhythmia, but we will code sick sinus syndrome. And what about old myocardial infarction? Yeah, we're going to code it. It's your heart. Yes. It's your vital organ. And this is just FYI. Okay? All right. And we are not going to code this seems disoriented, right? Because we're not coding anything not confirmed. This doctor did not confirm the orientation of this patient. This doctor said this patient seems disoriented, but that's not definitive. So we're not coding it. And ladies and gentlemen, all other diagnoses are codable. And I needed you all to see me work through that. I needed you to hear what goes through my head. So you know Mrs. J is going to code all of these heart ailments. Yeah, it's a vital organ. And yes, it is pertinent to every single encounter. Okay. All right. So if some people are having problems with the link, we're going to straighten that out and get it to you, okay? We're going to get you need a password and a link. All right, so we're going to get you both. All right, outstanding. All right, so who's ready? This is going to take us maybe about 10 minutes. All right, here is the challenge. Steps to solving the scenario. Don't forget, you're going to inventory, identify, and apply. Now we got a nice little scenario. This is a chart. This chart has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entries, and I'm going to show you how to select the principal diagnosis in a chart. Mrs. T, will you do me the honor to read the inpatient chart? And this is the discharge summary.
I would love to, Mrs. J. All right, here we go. Discharge summary, date of admission 127, date of discharge 129, discharge diagnosis congestive heart failure. Admission history. This is a 57-year-old married white male referred because of recurrent shortness of breath and cough. He states that he was in his usual state of good health until approximately Christmas, when he developed a persistent cough with associated dyspnea. His dyspnea was most prominent with exertion. He was treated with Seclor at that time with some improvement. However, his symptoms recurred and he underwent a second course of antibiotics, again with some improvement. However, his symptoms have now recurred and he is referred for further evaluation. He has a known tricuspid insufficiency, mild left ventricular dysfunction, and left ventricular dilation by echocardiogram done 6-2. He has a normal stress ECG 10-3. The patient also has hypertension. Course in hospital. The patient was referred because of recurrent shortness of breath and cough. Apparently, the patient has been doing well up until Christmas. His cough was treated with antibiotics with some improvement. His symptoms, however, recurred, requiring a second course of antibiotics. The patient was admitted with a diagnosis of congestive heart failure. He was started on diuretics with improvement in his physical examination and his symptoms. An echocardiogram was performed, which is described as above. The patient was extremely anxious to go home and thought that the rest of his care could be accomplished as an outpatient. He is tolerating his medications and will remain on the Capitan and the Lasix, and we will have a follow-up appointment with his doctor in 1 to 2 weeks. And I will see him again in approximately 4 weeks. It is recommended at that time that discussion for cardiac catheterization be carried out. This was discussed with the patient during his hospitalization, the reason being that perhaps his tricuspid insufficiency is more significant than what is appreciated on physical examination and by echocardiogram. The catheterization would aid in the evaluation of the etiology of his LV dysfunction and his left ventricular enlargement. He also has been given information about smoking cessation. Instructions on discharge. 1. Capitan 12.5 milligrams twice a day. Lasix 40 milligrams daily. And insulin, Humulin N14 in AM with 6 of regular, and Humulin N20 units in the PM with 12 of regular. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, Miss Tracy. Now, what we're going to do, it's a little different. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so what we do, we inventory as we go. So I know you all probably didn't have an opportunity, but use my list as the inventory list. And if there's something that I missed, go ahead and tell me. All right, here is the inventory list. Congestive heart failure, shortness of breath, cough, dyspnea, tricuspid insufficiency, left ventricular dysfunction, left ventricular dilation, hypertension, smoker, diabetes type 2, question mark, long-term use of insulin. All right, coders, do you see anything else? Is there anything that I missed? And I do want to walk you through this. This diabetes type 2, I put in parentheses because I'm looking for documentation on in the subsequent record that may tell me or confirm if this is diabetes type 2 or not. We do know this patient is taking insulin, right? Yeah, we do know that. So the discharge summary, Mrs. Tracy read from the discharge summary. This is a good place to start because this is where the physician provides their final analysis. And typically all of these diagnoses are codable, typically. Now we can also code in other parts of the record. Ms. Rochelle is going to come to the fore and read, I believe, from the history and physical. We can code from this part of the chart.
Okay. We're ready, coders. Thank you, Mrs. J. So we have admitted 127. Reason for admission. This is a 57-year-old married white male referred because of a recurrent shortness of breath and cough. He states that he was in his usual state of good health until approximately Christmas when he developed a persistent cough with associated dyspnea. His dyspnea was most prominent with exertion. He was treated with Keclor at that time with some improvement. However, His symptoms recurred, and he underwent a second course of antibiotics, again with some improvements. However, his symptoms have now recurred, and he is referred for further evaluation. He has known moderate tricuspid valve insufficiency, mild left ventricular dysfunction, and ventricular, sorry about that, dilation by echocardiogram. He had a normal stress ECG on 10 over 3. Past medical history. The patient has a history of type 1 diabetes mellitus. He believes that his most recent cholesterol reading was lower than 200. He previously has been hospitalized for pericarditis and for resection of popliteal artery aneurysm. He has a history of hypertension. Allergies, none known. Chronic medications, he has Humulin insulin 6 units of R and 14 units of N in the morning, and 12 units of R and 20 units of N in the evening. Lutein 20 milligrams orally daily. He denies any drug allergies. Family history, non-contributory. Social history, the patient is married and lives with his wife and smokes 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes per day. Review of systems, otherwise non-contributory.
Thank you, Ms. Rochelle. Okay, coders, type in the chat. Are there any additional diagnoses that we can abstract from this documentation? Okay, you guys are saying it. You all said diabetes type 1. Outstanding. All right, so I did grab something from the past medical history. I did agree that type 1, and I also abstracted pericarditis from the past medical history, and he had a resection of the popliteal artery aneurysm. So I said, yeah, I can abstract those. So we've got my numbers are wrong. Don't pay me any attention. All right, Miss Tracy, take it away. Thank you so much, Ms. Rochelle. Ms.
Okay.
Tracy is going to read from the consultation report. Obviously, a consult was requested.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. J. All right. Here's the consultation report, date 128. Podiatric consultation was requested. The patient's chart was reviewed in the following manner: H&P, labs, progress notes, physician's orders, previous consultations, and any other pertinent information remaining in the patient's chart. Chief complaint, diabetic foot care. Physical examination. The patient is a 57-year-old white male admitted with a history of hypertension and diabetes mellitus, insulin dependent for approximately 7 years. The patient has shortness of breath and is a smoker. The patient states that he has had a problem with one of the valves in his heart for approximately 3 years. The patient had resection of an aneurysm in the right leg in 1989. The patient has no known drug allergies. Bilateral great toenails are hypertrophic and mycotic with ingrowing tendencies. The patient has had trauma to both the great nails at the age of 12 years due to a vehicular accident. Gait analysis will be deferred at this time. Pulses are present in both feet and ankles. The toes are warm. There are no digital lesions at this time. The muscle tone and power are fair. The patient denied having intermittent claudication during gait or phlebitis affecting either lower extremity. The patient does have some numbness of the right great toe, status post-surgery for the popliteal aneurysm. Impression: 1. Type 1 diabetes mellitus. 2. Congestive heart failure. 3. Valvular heart disease. 4. Smoker. 5. Status post resection of aneurysm of the right leg. And 6. Hypertension. Plan: podiatric consultation, initial, comprehensive, excisional debridement of hypertrophic, mycotic nail plates, bilateral great toes, symptomatic. Procedure: excisional debridement of hypertrophic Mycotic nail plates, bilateral great toes, symptomatic. Recommendations: diabetic foot care every 1 to 3 months. The patient will be followed as needed.
Thank you so much, Mrs. T. All right, coders. Anything? I saw some people writing in the chat. Okay, so this is what I got. Let me know if you agree. Hypertrophic nails, mycotic nails, ingrown tendencies, numbness in great toe, valvular heart disease. Now, some of you might be good and you might say, I don't need to write all those signs and symptoms down. I can just go ahead and eliminate them. Go right ahead. But you know, my job is to instruct. So these are the inventory of the signs and symptoms. Does anyone have anything else that they think I should add to this list before I move on? Let me see. Did I miss anything, coders? Look at ya. Some people are way ahead of the game. All right. All right. Okay. Somebody said aneurysm. Yeah, but that aneurysm was treated right here when they did this resection, you know, because the aneurysm's like acute too. So that's why I didn't include it. All right, Ms. Rochelle. That was a good catch. Great catch. Take it away, Ms. Rochelle.
All right. So we are now going to go ahead and read the progress note for patient 8. For January 27, the note here is physical examination reveals rails and evidence of valvular heart disease. Will this your with Lasix and obtain an echocardiogram. Then 128, the patient better today, no shortness of breath, no edema, and the importance of smoking cessation was discussed with the patient. 129 will discharge the patient today. Radiology report, we have 128 chest x-ray diagnosis. The examination is compared to a prior examination on March 2 last year. The cardiac silhouette remains at the upper limits of normal in size. The pulmonary vascularity appears slightly congested, and there is a right-sided pleural effusion that was not present on the prior examination. There is minimal blunting of the left coscophrenic angle. The appearance suggests congestive heart failure. Impression: findings of congestive heart failure.
Thank you. All right, so thank you, Ms. Rochelle. Someone said, hey, why didn't you include claudication? It says that the patient denied claudication, so we are not going to code that. All right. Yes, you all are rocking. We're getting some more. Someone said it. Good job. Right-sided pleural effusion. Please excuse my numbers. So these are all of the signs and symptoms that we have abstracted from the documentation. Outstanding. So let's go ahead and clean this up and let's inventory and let's go ahead. Which chart are we going to follow, coders? Is this the first listed situation or a principal diagnosis? Yes. Yes, yes. This is the principal diagnosis. This is inpatient. This patient was admitted. All right, coders, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to place my pointer over the diagnosis sign or symptom. You let me know if it stays or it goes. And you can say if it goes, you can say it's integral. You can say why. All right? Or yes or no. Yes. All right. So congestive heart failure, does it stay? You guys are saying, you all saying the same thing. You're saying it stays. and it shall stay. What about shortness of breath? Absolutely. What is shortness of breath related to? That congestive heart failure? Absolutely. We're getting rid of that shortness of breath. What else? What about this cough? Does it go, stay, or no? It goes. You got to go. What about dyspnea? That's right. Someone said symptom of heart failure. What about dyspnea? Yeah, you got to go too. You're related to heart failure too. What about tricuspid insufficiency? Should it stay or should it go? That's right. That's right. It should stay. That's a valvular problem. What about left ventricular dysfunction? Okay, everyone's a little stumped on that. I see stay and go, stay and go. Well, let me tell you, this left ventricular dysfunction could really be related to this congestive heart failure or this insufficiency. How do I know it's a sign or symptom? Dysfunction. This is not an diagnosis. It's a sign or symptom, a heart sign or symptom, and so is left ventricular dilation, both symptoms of a heart condition. So you got to go. Got to go. What about hypertension? Is it going to stay? Absolutely. You're staying hypertension. What about smoker? Yeah. Yeah. You know what, smoker? You're going to stay. What about diabetes type 2? Yes. Yes, it stays. Okay, what about this insulin? Insulin. Hey, people were saying yes, no, yes, no. You know what? We'll get back to that. What about, oh, sorry, pericarditis? That is inflammation around the heart. So that's going to go. It's a symptom of a heart condition. What about status post resection of the popliteal artery? You know what? It's got to go. It's not pertinent. It treated an aneurysm in the leg, so got to go. Now, you might say, well, that's related to the heart. It might be, but I got rid of it. That aneurysm was repaired. What about hypertrophic nails? Yeah. Hypertrophic nails have to stay because that consult, they treated the hypertrophic nails. In fact, they carried out debridement. And hypertrophic nails, what about mycotic nails? Yeah, it stays. Now, just so you know, hypertrophic nails is the overgrowth of nails, and mycotic nails is fungus, so they're not one and the same. So they both can stay. What about ingrown tendencies? Yeah, you got to go. You're related to either hypertrophic nails or the mycotic nails. You got to go. What about that numbness in the great toe? Yes. Yes, you have to go. It could be related to your diabetes. It could be related to your nails because you had injuries to your toes. You got to go. What about this valvular heart disease? Yes, someone said it right off the bat. They said it's related to tricuspid insufficiency, tricuspid valve. Yes, got to go. What about this right-sided pleural effusion? Remember, we said pleural effusion is a symptom of congestive heart failure. That's right, name twin. I see ya. All right. So this is our list. So I told you we would get back to this long-term use of insulin. And you know what? We got to go reference our guidelines. Guidelines C4A, diabetes, right here. Insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. This is type 1. You do not assign insulin with it because insulin use is understood. So no insulin. You have to go. All right. Now, here you go. This is our inventory list, and we have to select the chief reason for the encounter after study. All right. We've already assessed our signs and symptoms. Now, coders, we have 7. Of the 7, which of the 7 is the principal diagnosis? And 100% of you said the same thing. And some of you might not remember, so it says discharge summary, discharge diagnosis, congestive heart failure, then it went on. Not to confuse anyone, but I just want to let you know that was on the discharge diagnosis, just so you can remember. All right. And that's right, you must be an AMCI student. If you said hypertension, outstanding. Somebody tell me why. Why is hypertension the principal diagnosis? Yeah, you guys are saying it. If you go to the guidelines, guideline C9A1, anytime you have hypertension in the setting of CHF, you have to code the hypertensive heart disease. You have to code the hypertension. And right here, I took this right from your MCG manual. Go to guideline C9A1. And right here, it tells you how to sequence. You're going to sequence first from the I11 category, followed by your heart failure code. Heart failure can't be first. You guys are awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So this is congestive heart failure will be sequenced second. All other diagnoses will be sequenced additionally. And our chief reason for the encounter, principal diagnosis, will be hypertensive heart disease. Okay, so that is it. So hopefully we gave you an opportunity to view a chart, how to analyze a chart, how to select your principal, your first listed diagnosis, and do not forget, coders, your principal diagnosis is the condition after study that is chiefly responsible for occasioning the patient's admission, and your first listed condition is the primary or the chief reason for the outpatient encounter. And let's quickly review what we did today. We reviewed principal diagnosis selection, first listed diagnosis selection, and hopefully we brought you one step closer to principal first listed code selection mastery. All right, coders, so you were amazing. At this time, I want to thank you all for coming. We have gone over the time and you all were incredible. At the end of this webinar, you will receive an email from Webinar. Webinar will give you the link to your CEUs. You have to take a quiz. Upon completion of that quiz, you will receive your CEUs. All right, there is a 1-question survey. Please complete the survey. And I, again, want to thank you, team. If you want to take yourselves off mute in alpha order, if you want to say so long, thank you. I think my
Ah,
team is gone.
oh,
Okay.
no, I was like, I'll go first, I guess. I know I'm not, I don't come first, but in alpha order, but I'll be happy to go first. I want to say what an amazing presentation, Mrs. J. Thank you so much for coming in here and sharing your knowledge with us. This was a wonderful presentation, and coders, you all did a fabulous job. Thank you so much for attending. It was a pleasure and my honor to be here with everyone today.
Yes, I just want to say too that coders, hopefully that if you enjoyed this webinar, there are more. Mrs. J will be back for more events as well. Make sure that you check out our March Madness calendar and register for more events, for more CEUs, and hopefully we'll see you around for more. Okay. Again, thank you, Mrs. J, for a brilliant presentation, and also team, thank you, and coders, enjoy and enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's everyone. You know what? Thank you, team. I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much for being troopers and team players. We did this on the fly. Hopefully, you learned something. For those of you that have questions, go ahead, ask them. Go to the AMCI website, ask them in the chat. I'm going to be there waiting for you. Also, um, there was one thing that I wanted to say. All right. Hey, if you want to watch this playback, you have to purchase it, okay? There is an on demand. If you purchase the paid series for $100, you can watch every single one of these playbacks on demand, and you also earn CEUs. So just FYI. Again, thank you. You all were amazing. Take it away, DJ.
4,000 exam passers and free classes at AMCI. Learn to code straight from home or on the road at AMCI. We're on the East Coast, the West Coast. We're all around.